family was going on our first road trip. We're all crammed in this little purple station wagon. It smells like rotten fruit. It's awful. No, we're just driving along to visit my grandfather up in Castlegar. It's the first time I've been to his house. And as we're pulling into his house, I realized something is very, very wrong, because this house looks awful. And if you've ever been to Castlegar, British Columbia, you know that the Castlegar standard of awful is a whole new low. And I'm not just saying the house is run down. I'm saying that as we were pulling in, there are giant cords of wood just lying there on the ground. There's trash strewn everywhere. There are 15 lawnmowers, 8 motorcycles, and 6 cars. None of these have worked since like the 1970s. And I'm sitting there in the back of the station wagon like, Mom, why could we have not gone to Disneyland? It's not a good time. And as we get into the house, it just gets worse. Like, you can barely walk because the walls are crammed with boxes filled with everything from old photos to empty cans of beans. It's terrifying. Flash forward 4 years, it's 2006 now. It's one of those nights where I'm just watching really bad reality TV. And on comes a show about hoarding. And that's when I learned the word hoarder. My family did not call him that. We called him eccentric. I kind of preferred hoarder. Anyways, the good thing about this is it ignited this idea in me, because my grandfather, as a person, was wonderful. He was my grandfather, I loved him. And I thought, well, if Grandpa's so crazy, who's to say I'm not? Who's to say we all aren't a little bit nuts? Maybe he's just a symptom of a much bigger problem that runs through our society. 9-year-old me was a really smart dude. It's really just gone downhill from there, but TEDx is about an idea we're spreading, and this event is about amplifying something. And what I want to amplify is awareness around mental illness. I don't usually condone killing elephants, but mental illness is the elephant in the room, and it needs to die. Because the more we refuse to talk about it and accept it, the harder it is for people who suffer from mental disorders to get help. We have this mentality as a society that the mentally ill are tucked away in a little corner that we don't have to worry about. You know, they're locked in psychiatry wards, they're in prison, or they're safely employed as public school teachers. A lot of this is reinforced by the media that we watch. You know, shows like BBC Sherlock might make you think that sociopaths are really romantic. Get a little darker now. Shows like Wall Street dramas or horror flicks might make you think that people with bipolar disorders are either extremely insane, coke-snorting businessmen, or that they're psychopaths. In movies like A Beautiful Mind might make you think that every schizophrenic you meet is some sort of mathematical genius. The truth is a lot scarier. There are 300,000 people with bipolar disorder in this country. The number is about the same for schizophrenics. 10% of the Canadian population is depressed, and that number jumps to 20% for youth. The mentally ill are not locked up in a little cage that you don't have to worry about. They're your friends, they're your family, they're your loved ones, and they might even be you. And I know this firsthand because Lordy knows the family of mental illness trend did not end with my grandfather. He was a hoarder and also had bipolar disorder. My uncle has bipolar disorder. I have another uncle who is depressed. I have an aunt who has anxiety issues. I have some really weird family reunions, basically. It's not a good time. You go into, and when we start talking about family friends, I have family friends who struggle with everything from alcoholism, which is, in its essence, addiction is a mental disorder, it's important to remember, and bipolar disorder as well. I've really seen it all. But what this has taught me is that mental disorders do not define a person. I have a friend of the family who struggles with addiction, but she's not locked in a drunk tank. She's actually a professor at Cambridge University. I have another family friend who's bipolar. He's not some sort of crazy guy on Wall Street just going, he's actually helping to do research to help cure breast cancer. Mental illness does not define a person, and the stereotypes that we build around mental illnesses are actually usually wrong. And the reason this is dangerous for us is that because we build these stereotypes, people who do have mental disorders who need help are afraid to come get it. I had the privilege the other day of speaking to somebody who has something called borderline personality disorder, which is basically there's another personality within him trying to take over his daily functions. It's really terrifying. And I said, how did you break the stigma around that? How did you go out and get help? And he said, you know what, Zach? I just had to effing own it. And I was like, wow, that's intense. But he was right, because the fact that mental illness can destroy your life is really effing true. Go home and turn on the news. You'll probably see a report, number 5,000, on Jian Ghomeshi, who is a sick dude who did some unforgivable things. But if he had been able to get the help that he had needed, or even better, if people were able to actually speak about what he had been doing in an open environment, maybe it would never have happened. So change the channel now. You'll probably see a report on the murder of Nathan Cirillo. Brave Canadian soldier, killed by a man who was schizophrenic, a troubled past, who was not able to get the help he needed. If he had been helped, maybe Nathan would still be with us today. Change the channel again. We'll come to a marathon of the movies of Robin Williams. I think we agree that is a tragedy that most definitely could have been prevented if we had had the resources applicable. The stereotypes that we build do nothing but confine the mentally ill and make it harder for them to speak about their disorders. And a big reason that I'm speaking to you today is because as youth, we are targets #1 for mental disorders. I already mentioned that 20% of us are depressed because we've created kind of a culture of extreme stress and pressure. And as a result of this, mental illness is a constant reality in our generation. From grade 8 on, I've seen friends come to school with scars on their wrists, or saying, I'm so anxious, I can never sleep at night, oh my God, or telling me that they're depressed. And usually instead of receiving sympathy, they're often mocked for it. I had a friend in the 10th grade who dropped out because he couldn't get out of bed in the morning. A friend of mine who goes to a school that's not this one was told at her opening assembly that 1 in every 3 girls in her grade would suffer a nervous breakdown by the end of the year. And I'm like, that is a harsh thing to say in an opening assembly. Welcome to the year, here we go. 1 in 3 of you will have a nervous breakdown. I didn't think it was so funny when she tried to take her life last spring. 1 in 6 girls in our generation has an eating disorder. I've already said that 20% of us are usually depressed. That number is about the same for people with anxiety disorders. And 1% of us suffer from schizophrenia. It really is the elephant in the room, and it's something that needs to be talked about. So I'm here doing this talk, not just for my grandfather, but also for my friends who have talked to me about suicidal thoughts. I'm doing it for my friends who have already suffered the consequences of mental illness. And in the end, I'm doing it for you, because I think the first step to be able to solve mental illness is to be able to have an honest, frank discussion about it and realize how common it is. And that a mental disorder does not define you, but what you do about it does. And as a closing point, I'd just like to say that my grandfather's name was not Hoarder. He was not eccentric. It was Frank. And he was a very real human being, just like you or me. And I loved him very much. Thank you.